Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about some Shenmue news. Yes, it's one of those videos. It's been a while. I haven't really had much to talk about on that front, and it's kind of nice to occasionally go back and talk about my favorite game franchise. In fact, for this, because it's a discussion video, we even have the nice mic out here. Now, granted, we have some display pieces, but they're not really super relevant things you need to focus on. But yeah, so we're going to go ahead and talk about some recent news and where I think this might be going, partially because, A, I'm a huge fan of the franchise, but B, I was also largely involved in a lot of this, not the current news, but historically with Shenmue. So I want to give some, shall we say, industry insider type of assumptions and predictions on where I think this is going. Before we do that, though, if you guys could like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, as well as check out all the social media stuff in the description: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, my Spreadshirt, travel channel, etc. It's all in the description. I appreciate the support on all those platforms, the follows, etc. Thank you so much for watching. Now, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so where does one even begin? We're going to be talking about the obvious news that happened, which there's actually very little news that we know, things that are actually factual, like knowns. Most of this is speculation, and I'm going to be very upfront about that. But I also thought we'd talk a little bit of history about how we kind of got here. First, we'll start with the obvious news. Shenmue III's publication rights are no longer in the possession of Deep Silver. They are now in the possession of a company called ININ, represented here by a game called Air Twister, which I'm sure we'll talk about again. And that can mean any number of things. They announced this one day after the 5th anniversary of Shenmue III's release, which, if I recall correctly, was November 19th, 2019. And thus the announcement was then November 20th, 2024. Now, from that announcement, they basically said they would be shepherding the franchise forward, but the way they articulate it very much has to do with Shenmue 3 specifically, not the franchise necessarily as a whole. And we'll talk about that, I guess, in a bit. But and then they basically said, we're going to have another announcement as we respect the franchise. And, you know, they clearly care more about it than I think Deep Silver ever did. And they're going to have another announcement on the 25th anniversary of the franchise, which actually happens to be at the end of this month. It's December 29th. 2024, which should be the 25th anniversary. So we don't actually have that long to wait before we find out like what they're cooking up here, or what initially they're cooking up. So that's what we're going to speculate. Okay. Now, I think a little backstory is in order here. The original publishers of the game was Deep Silver. They were brought on board, I think, like a year after the Kickstarter initially happened. And here's what I'm going to say. I have a lot of very bad things to say about Deep Silver and the way they handled the franchise, and I don't even mean that as a fan. I actually mean that personally. Like, for those who don't know, I'm not just a fan of Shenmue. Like, yes, I am a huge fan of it, but it's played a significant role in my life, and largely also professionally. Like, I've worked with Sega on the reissue. I actually worked a bit with Deep Silver on Shenmue 3, although most of the time it was circumventing them to help them. You have no idea how frustrating they were. And I can tell you they largely disrespected the IP holder. They largely disrespected the content creators. They largely disrespected the development team. They largely disrespected just everyone. Like, I have stories, but I'm trying to be professional and not be so upset with them, because here's the thing. On top of just literally the way they personally treated me at multiple turns, and again, setting that aside, a lot of the issues people have with Shenmue 3, notably the way it ends, notably some of the content or lack thereof, I'm actually going to look over at Deep Silver and say, that was them. That's all I will say on that. I'm going to leave it at that for now. But let's just put it this way. Because I got to work with Sega a lot, I got to hear a lot of the other side of this, because Sega is still the ultimate IP holder of Shenmue. And as a result of that, they had to be kind of kept up to date on what was going on. And let's just say there was a lot of face palming over at Sega at Deep Silver's actions. I'll leave it at that. But that said, even though I have a lot of bad things to say about them, one of the good things I will say is, and this is simple reality, is Shenmue 3 would not have happened without them. And I know the historical assumption is, oh, but fans made it. Kickstarter. Remember, we raised a record number of money, $6.3 million. That's what made it. That was seed money. The actual budget for Shenmue 3 was far higher than I think is public knowledge at this point. I still don't actually know, but it's a lot more than you might think. And I won't say what their methods were, but Deep Silver did actually generate the revenue necessary for that higher budget. So when I try to look at it from their perspective and say, look, this is a big budget game, bigger than you guys would think, and we're sinking a lot of money into it in a kind of shaky franchise. We want results to come out. I can see why they were a little worried and why they started to scale it back and they started to force it out the door. I understand that side of it. And I would have actually respected them more for that if it weren't for the idiotic PR policies that they had. And I know that firsthand just because of the way they personally treated me and they treated a lot of others. But again, I'm not going to go into all those details here. But let's just say they were a necessary evil. That's the only way I can put Deep Silver in the context of Shenmue and their overall contribution to the franchise. Now, because again, I worked with people at Sega, I actually got access to some of these numbers. Here's what I can tell you that might shock you. Shenmue 1 and 2 re-release made money. It didn't make like crazy money, but it didn't lose Sega any money, so they were actually pretty happy about it, which is why you see more, merch out of Shenmue than you used to, is because they recognize it's still something they can make money off of and it doesn't cost them anything anymore. Shenmue 3 actually made money. It didn't make a ton. It was kind of the same story. It ended up making money, but wasn't like crazy. I will also say this. There was some interest from Deep Silver in continuing. There was some interest in Yu Suzuki in continuing, just not together. They did not really see eye to eye on the direction of the franchise. And again, these are not my stories to tell, and I will not. But I don't think that Deep Silver was just ready to put down like, oh, here's $80 million for Shenmue 4, just do it. Not, it would never have been that high, by the way. That argument never happened. But like, I think that they might have been willing to do kind of a low budget Shenmue 4 or something called Shenmue 4, and it would not have satisfied Yu Suzuki's expectations. So yeah, if from what I understand, he was very willing to let the contract lapse. Let's leave it at that. Enter ININ or ININ Games. Now, ININ Games does not own the Shenmue IP. That is actually still Sega. So all they really have, and this must be understood, is Shenmue 3 was a very unique circumstance, like how it came into existence. Most other companies, and I used to say this back in the day when the game's Kickstarter was happening, or even before it did, was that Shenmue 3 by any other company would have been known as like Cave Escaper Man 3, because the IP holder almost never cooperates with the former developer who wants to continue their franchise. Sega did. They were unwilling to fund it, but they were willing to just grant him the license, the official name, the official characters, all that stuff. And he said, just make your game. It's essentially an independent game that is officially licensed. So much so that Sega's name is on the box just because they own the IP. They actually did some of the publication in Japan. They were actually considered the partner, official partner, for whatever that means, in Japan as well. So there is a relationship there, and it's a productive one. So what that means is a Shenmue 4, because obviously people want to talk about that, Sega would still have to be involved to an extent, but I can tell you they're very willing to let it happen. They will not make it, but they will let it happen. So that's not actually a concern. That's a much bigger win than you might think, because it's literally doing nothing. So it seems like it's not, but it is. It's huge. These companies usually are not that cooperative on their IPs. So all ININ has is the publication rights. They don't even own the game. They just own the rights to continue to publish it. And the fact that it happened one day after the contract lapsed, that should tell you something. It is also worth noting, by the way, that only like earlier this summer, Yu Suzuki did an interview about the potential of Shenmue 4. And when asked, like, what is the primary thing you need? He said, a partner. He was referring to a publisher. At that point, Deep Silver was still technically involved, but he was straight up not wanting to work with them, even in that interview. Now, that tells you that ININ probably wasn't seriously considered at that point, and maybe still isn't. That we simply don't know. But that should give you some sense of the time scale. So I don't think this was some grand thing where ININ pitched themselves like 2 years ago and everybody's just been sitting there waiting. It's not impossible, I suppose, but whatever. We are talking about Shenmue 3 here, not Shenmue 4, though we can speculate on that later. So who is ININ? What do they do? What's their deal? Or ININ? They're obviously an indie developer and publisher, or at least they're definitely a publisher. I actually don't know if they develop stuff in-house or not. So that brings us to Air Twister, this game right here. The reason this game is out here, this is actually a game made by Yu Suzuki. It's kind of the spiritual successor to Space Harrier. I actually did a video on this game like a year ago. ININ reached out to me back then and was like, would you cover Air Twister? And that's the kind of thing where I normally wouldn't, because you guys might have noticed watching my channel, I don't really do game reviews like ever. In fact, before Air Twister, the last one I even did was Shenmue 3, excluding all my like indie Dreamcast videos. But in that case, I wanted to do it for the sole reason that I knew that this was the best chance of advancing the Shenmue franchise forward. And just a year later, here we are. There's actually an update on it. All those tweets, all those Facebook posts, all that, the social media buzz, all those YouTube videos, etc. People supporting Air Twister. I told you that would have an impact. You don't just vote with, the like button. You also vote with your wallet. People buying Air Twister gave ININ enough confidence, or ININ enough confidence to say, all right, maybe we can be involved with Shenmue here. We have a good relationship with Yu Suzuki. We enjoyed what we got out of that game. We can do more. That's where we're at. So what does that actually practically mean? The truth is we don't know, but here's what I would speculate. I would think the lowest hanging fruit option is a PS5 physical edition of Shenmue 3, like the 5th anniversary edition that has, the whole game on it. It has all the patches built into the disc, and it has the 3 DLCs. Now, the thing is, I think that's the easiest one because the PS4 build of the game already runs on the PS5. In fact, there's actually a PS5 specific patch for it. So having that all kind of bundled together and just calling it a day, that would literally be the easiest thing they could do. Adding any sort of additional content, we can talk about that in a bit, but I'm starting there. That's the initial announcement I would expect on December 29th. Where we're bringing Shenmue 3 to a new generation of consoles, starting with the PlayStation 5, because they obviously have a history of releasing games on PS5. Like, they did this version on the PS4, which doesn't need to exist because there's already a PS4 version of the game. They obviously did the PS5, and they did a Switch version, which we'll talk about in a second, and they did a digital Xbox version as well. There is no physical edition of Air Twister, and that leads me into the next part. The next most likely announcement I would expect is Shenmue 3 Definitive Edition, if you want to call it that, being released finally to the Xbox ecosystem. So it would run on the Xbox One, as well as the Series S, Series X, etc., etc. But I would expect it to be purely digital. I would not expect a physical edition, again, because they did not even do one for Air Twister. The only caveat to that, the only way I could see them doing a physical Xbox edition is if it's done through limited run games, and I cite them specifically as opposed to like super rare games or any of the others, is because limited run games actually did the collector's edition of Shenmue 3 back in 2019, and then they did the complete edition, as it was called. I think that was like 2 years ago, also for the PS4. So I don't know if they have any sort of, deal with them. I just think that that's most likely given the healthy nature of the relationship between the two already, and the fact that they've been very willing to do it. And they can do Xbox content. So that would be my guess. If you're going to get a physical Xbox edition, it would probably be through that. But I do not think we would get that announcement right away. I think that they're going to kind of slowly roll this out. And I think your December announcement is most likely just those two platforms. Maybe eventually a limited run announcement of a physical edition for Xbox, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the obvious one here, Nintendo stuff. Is it coming to Switch, et cetera? Okay, that's a coin toss. So the thing with the Switch is for the Shenmue 3 to run on it, Shenmue 3 would need a lot of development aid to actually get the game to run in a watered down form. It would take a lot of effort to get it down to the Switch. And people say, like, well, they did it for The Witcher 3, so, like, why not? There's some differences. First of all, The Witcher 3 was a huge runaway success of a game, and so there was going to be demand to play it portably. Like, that was kind of the whole thing, is at the time, before the Steam Deck, that was the only way you could play the game portably, was on a watered-down version on the Switch. And I don't think Shenmue 3 simply has that demand. The second one is they also, CD Projekt Red, who made that game in the first place, also had the absolute, baller amount of money to do that and spend development assets on it. I don't think that they would necessarily care to do that over at YSNet, even though the Switch itself is obviously a big hit. And the second part of that is we have to remember that the Switch is near the end of its cycle. It is actually not impossible to think that even this spring in 2025, we could be looking at Nintendo's successor, Switch 2, quote unquote, could very realistically be launching in April. If that's the case, and ININ would maybe know more about that than we do, just because, they might actually have development kits, who knows. But if they know that, they probably wouldn't bother with a Switch edition just because it would cost more and not really be worth it at that point in the life cycle. However, that does actually open up the possibility of releasing it on whatever Nintendo's successor hardware is. And that gives a little bit more, marketing room to be like, Shenmue finally comes to Nintendo on the next generation, while also requiring far less development assets to reduce the quality of the game, et cetera, et cetera. But that's, again, a guess. And I would think if that was the case, that's probably around the time that maybe a limited run announcement of Shenmue 3 coming to Xbox physically would happen. For those who are curious, like, why did Deep Silver never do it? That was actually, for once, not their fault. So there was a deal with Sony. Like I said, Shenmue 3 came about in a lot of odd ways. Sony's involvement with Shenmue 3 was they gave it free physical PS4 publication for a time anyway, or basically eventually, once Deep Silver took over, they kind of just wiped away some of the costs. But their condition to that was no physical or no Xbox edition, at least at the time. All those rights have lapsed, so that really doesn't matter anymore. The other factor with it was YSNet, being a Japanese studio, like an indie studio no less, really didn't see the advantage of doing an Xbox version when in Japan that system is utterly irrelevant. You just have to understand how socially aware they would have to be in the case of the Xbox. Like it's just irrelevant to them. But someone like ININ no doubt says, okay, well, we can get money out of this, especially because all these rights deals have lapsed. It doesn't matter anymore. Release it in the other countries on the Xbox. I think that's very realistic. But yeah, that's just projecting forward. So those are the kind of the low-hanging fruit options, right? So then we talk about the future. What else can you do with it? Now, the thing is, and I'm not going to go into too many details here, there was more content for Shenmue 3 that was created that was never used. Some of it could hypothetically be used as the beginning of Shenmue 4, or you can repurpose it as some sort of DLC for Shenmue 3. Now, if we were voting on this, I would say I actually don't want that for Shenmue 3. I would want it to be part of a package deal to get Shenmue 4 started. And I say that not knowing how far along any of that content might be, what state it's in. And this is just, I don't know any of that. So it might be possible, like if you're going to be like, oh, we're going to do a Shenmue 4, we wouldn't even want to use it. So let's just get it out there now. If that's the case, fine. Maybe include it as some sort of special edition. We got a new expansion level that we're working on. We didn't finish. Give them some money to finish it up and whatever. I don't know. But personally, I kind of like the idea of saving it to kind of lower the budget of Shenmue 4 and get that game rolling. But that's a different discussion entirely. If we're talking about getting Shenmue 4 made, then we're already in a pretty good place. But yeah, so the other things they could do with Shenmue 3 specifically, I can tell you this. There was a lot of issues with Deep Silver when it came to the voice section of the game. I'm not going to go into all those details, but a buddy of mine who actually did the voice direction for the game, his name is Bill. He actually was, he would do the recordings. He would have the actors come in, record, do temp tracks, all this sort of stuff. And he would send off some of the audio just as samples to Deep Silver. And apparently Deep Silver in a lot of cases would use the temp tracks, even though he was like, no, don't use that. Here's the final one. They just would never update it. So from what he told me, there's a whole bunch of audio tracks of audio from Shenmue 3 that's considered the final ones that are not in the game, to his infinite frustration. That work is done. It exists. And Bill is very willing to talk and be involved. So if ININ or ININ is watching, send me an email. We can get this done. That's all that would take is a text. We can get that one done. The other one that's actually interesting is my buddy Eric Kelso. He was the voice of Guizhong as well as Fukusan in Shenmue 1. He was also the voice of Ren in Shenmue 2. Again, due to, let's say, miscommunication at Deep Silver, he was not involved in Shenmue 3, even though he desperately wanted to be. And as a result of that, he and the fan base got together, and he actually went ahead and did a fan dub of the game. So his characters are all voiced by him, and there's a PC build of it for Shenmue 3 on PC where you do the Eric Kelso mod effectively, and it's just all his audio. That's already recorded. Again, ININ, if you are watching this, tweet at me. Let's talk. We can actually get you that. The work exists and everybody's on board. This isn't even a monetary thing. Like, we can just do this and make a more definitive edition of Shenmue 3, at least for the Western audience. So yeah, just hit me up. Hit me up if you're watching. And anybody who's watching this video, hit up ININ. I'm telling you, we can do that. We can get that done. But anyway, so yeah, that is very, very realistic. And there's actually an example of that in the past, by the way. Back to the Future, the game by Telltale. Anybody remember that game? I actually did a full edit of that game on this channel as like a movie, 2 movies. The original release that Telltale did, when you got to Biff Tannen, originally played by Thomas F. Wilson in the movies, when they made the game, he was not interested in voicing the character. So the game came out, it had been out for a few years, and that was it. And then they decided to do a reissue for then the new consoles, PS4 and Xbox One. And when they were doing that, Thomas F. Wilson changed his mind. He decided he did want to play Biff. So they brought him in, he did a recording session for all of Biff's lines, and they could do an updated version with that. I'm basically pitching that we can put Eric Kelso in the new edition of Shenmue 3 if you want to make it a more complete edition, which is not nothing. I mean, Eric did... Guizhang and Fukusan just have little cameos in Shenmue 3. It's not a big deal, but Ren is pretty substantial in there. The fact that Eric, A, is willing, and B, already did the work should tell you a lot. But anyway, we can talk about that. So these are the kind of updates I could see being more realistic. Anything beyond that, like new DLCs, or I know people have been talking about, like, what if the new chapters just roll out as DLCs, as expansions to Shenmue 3? I'm not a huge fan of that idea at all. DLCs in particular I have a problem with because they'd be such on a case-by-case basis. Like, I don't think anybody here really wants another, like, oh, there's a new casino area in Shenmue 3 that previously didn't exist and is not really relevant. I don't know if we really want development assets going into that or money going into that, especially because if you're going to dub it, you then have to bring back both teams from Japan and the US to like redo everything for those sections. That's a lot of logistical work and a lot of financial work. And I just don't really think they would want to do that for such piecemeal little add-ons. As for expanded content where it's like, oh, the next chapter of Shenmue is just going to be a DLC pack from Shenmue 3 episodes or whatever, I can't even begin to express how much I would hate that. But that's just a personal preference. I kind of prefer the story coming as Yu Suzuki wants it told. And that goes for, by the way, like when it comes to the content, people are like, oh, if we got Shenmue 4, he should just make a bunch of sacrifices and just compress it so that I can kick Lan Di's butt at the end. Please don't have that attitude. That's just not how that would work. That's actually apparently a large part of the reason people didn't like Shenmue 3 in a lot of ways is they're like, I didn't like it because at the end I didn't get to beat up Lan Di. It's like, if that's what you thought you were supposed to do at the end of the game, if that's what you were expecting, then you don't really know the franchise all that well, because that's not ever going to be the point. The story is not a revenge story. It's much more complex than that, but I'll leave it at that. Now, Shenmue 3, don't get me wrong, it did have some problems. Some of which you might be able to... There could be little bugs here and there they could patch out. That would be kind of cool. That would be up to, again, Yu Suzuki to be like determined on which ones those are. I will admit the food mechanic I absolutely hated. If I could change anything, it would be just get rid of that entirely. I did not like that at all. I know people had issues with the lack of throw moves. That was a financial matter. I kind of doubt they would integrate that at this point. Maybe they would, but from the sense I've gotten is that Yu Suzuki's kind of done with Shenmue 3 and he's ready to move on to the next one. So I doubt he'd go back and be like, let's make an upgraded version of everything. Not impossible, but it's just not... I wouldn't expect it. As well as the Virtual Fighter engine being a huge factor. Like, that was what was in Shenmue 1 and 2. They could not use that for Shenmue 3, so they had to build their own effectively on a shoestring budget. So yeah. But anyway, whatever. Those kinds of things. And people are always upset about the ending. I can tell you straight up, the ending was Deep Silver's fault. That's all I'm going to say about that. But yeah, so where does that leave us? In the moment, this is good news. It means there is a little glimmer of hope for Shenmue to have some continuation, but keep it realistic, keep it grounded. Like anything in our world, this is a vote with your wallet situation. So whenever there is some sort of reissue of Shenmue 3, expect to be buying it again if you want to have any sort of realistic chance at a Shenmue 4. ININ or ININ is not in any way associated with Shenmue 4 yet, unless they somehow landed that behind the scenes too, and that's going to be part of this big shebang announcement that I'm not expecting either, which would be a wild, but I don't think they're going to do it. I think they would roll this out slowly is the way I would do it. But who knows? All my point is a year ago when Air Twister came out and we were just like, hey, maybe this will lead to something. It did. Those tweets, those things matter. These companies, they do actually pay attention to that. If you vote with your wallet, that's far more valuable. So whatever reissue they come up with, support it if you care about any sort of Shenmue 4 future. and then we can speculate one day on what Shenmue 4 is. Now, personally, do I think this also means like we're guaranteed Shenmue 4? Absolutely not. I do think that Shenmue 4 is probable. I think ININ, if they prove themselves or they're happy with the results, they might be willing to take a risk on it. Now, keep in mind, ININ or ININ is not the biggest company. From a financial perspective, you are going down here from Sega to Deep Silver down to ININ. But that doesn't mean they don't care about the quality of the content. They could be exactly the right shepherds of the franchise because they could just be like, no, we're actually fans. We actually care about how this turns out, and we're willing to stake on it. We will see. This is fundamentally good news. It's not like the major news we need or want, I should say, but it's good news. So, again, when the time comes, vote with your wallet. But yes, that in the short term, that's my guess, is that we're getting a physical, probably also as well as digital, PS5 build of the game, maybe with PS5 Pro support or enhancement, who knows. Probably a digital Xbox version. Those are my two biggest expectations. And then maybe eventually some sort of Nintendo iteration, depending on the future of the Switch, as well as a physical Xbox version through limited run games in like a year after. That's a guess. But we'll see. What do you guys think? I'm curious. Everybody tell me what you think out there. And maybe one day we'll tell all these Deep Silver stories. I know I've told them to some people and they're just like, man, Deep Silver. Ugh. Like, I want to talk about it, but I can't. I shouldn't. It's not professional. But anyway, so you guys tell me what you think down below. Are you interested in all this stuff? What are your expectations? Like I said, I think all the patches and DLC would be the bare minimum that would be on the disc. And I think that's what we're doing here. Wouldn't surprise me if we see a new wave of merch come out of all this, which again, all has to go through Sega as well. But I'm excited. It's like the first legitimate exciting thing we have to talk about in Shenmue world for quite some time. And all had to do with finally Deep Silver getting out of the way. So there you go. Anyway, do me a favor, please like the video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, as well as check out all the social media stuff in the description: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, Travel Channel, etc. I appreciate the support on those platforms. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all later.